I am Eleanor Hayes, a widow of 66, and on the night of my birthday, I learned how quickly a celebration can turn into a battlefield. The air smelled of roses and roasted chicken. Laughter clattered against the chandelier, and I stood in my own living room, surrounded by people who were supposed to be my family. My son Daniel sat by the punch bowl, his face bright but distracted, and his wife Olivia, my daughter-in-law, held the microphone like it was her weapon of choice. She smiled wide for the guests, her red dress catching every glimmer of light. "Let's all raise a glass to Eleanor," she began, her voice sweet enough to sting. For a brief moment, I let myself hope she meant it kindly, but then the sweetness curdled. 66 years, she went on, and still so stubborn, so unwilling to let go. If it were up to me, she paused, savoring the silence. If it were up to me, she'd die alone, unwanted, with no one left to cling to. The words dropped like stones into the room. A fork slipped from someone's hand. My breath caught in my chest, not from weakness, but from fury held steady. I felt every eye turn toward me, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for me to laugh it off. Instead, I set down my glass with deliberate calm. I looked Olivia straight in the eye and spoke with the weight of every year I had lived. "You have 10 minutes, I said, my voice low enough to cut through the silence. 10 minutes to collect yourself and leave my house." Gasps broke out. Someone coughed to cover the tension, and Olivia's smile faltered just enough to reveal the cracks beneath. Daniel stared at me, torn between loyalty and confusion. I stood taller, bracing against the ache of my loss, against the cruelty of that girl who thought I was too fragile to defend myself. She had no idea what Richard, my late husband, had left behind, or how carefully he had prepared me for this very moment. And as the clock ticked, I knew the night was only beginning. The morning after Richard's funeral, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me. For 42 years, that seat belonged to him, filled with his steady presence, his newspaper folded just so, his coffee stirred without sugar. Now it stood untouched, and the silence pressed down on me like a heavy coat I couldn't shrug off. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, reminding me of time I had no desire to count. In those early weeks, I tried to keep myself busy. I polished Richard's old pocket watch, watered the roses he planted along the fence, and kept his favorite mug on the counter, though I couldn't bring myself to use it. But grief is a clever thief. It sneaks into every corner, even when your hands are full. At night, I reached out in bed only to feel the cool sheet where his warmth should have been. That emptiness was my constant companion. Daniel visited when he could, his voice gentle but hurried. He had a new job downtown, a new wife to build a life with. Olivia began to appear more often, stepping into my kitchen with her polished nails and practiced smile. She'd say things like, "You shouldn't be alone here. Eleanor, you need guidance, someone to take care of you." At first, I thought she meant well, but her eyes always roamed over the furniture, the framed photographs, the jewelry box Richard once gave me. It was as if she was tallying the worth of my life. I told myself I was imagining it, that grief made me suspicious. Still, when she suggested organizing my bills, or when she accidentally left her handbag on Richard's desk, something twisted in my stomach. I had learned to survive silence, but intrusion was harder to bear. That was when I realized solitude might have been heavy, but it was mine. And losing Richard did not mean losing myself. When October rolled around, Olivia announced she wanted to host my birthday party. She said it in that bright, decisive tone of hers, as if the matter had already been settled. "It'll be perfect, Eleanor. You shouldn't have to lift a finger. We'll invite everyone and make it memorable." She stood in my living room with a notepad, already sketching out where the tables should go, as if she owned the place. Daniel looked uncertain. He rubbed the back of his neck and glanced at me. "Mom, only if you want to. We can keep it small this year, or just go out for dinner." His voice was hesitant, the way he used to sound as a boy asking permission to stay out late. I wanted to decline. My grief still sat too close to the surface, and the thought of strangers filling my house made me tired, but Olivia's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with determination. "It's not about you cooking or planning," she pressed. "This is about honoring Richard's memory and showing how loved you are." Her words carried the right sentiment, yet something about the way she emphasized showing unsettled me. Over the next week, deliveries began arriving. Floral arrangements in oversized boxes, crates of wine stacked in my hallway, menus drafted by a catering service I hadn't approved. I discovered Olivia had used my credit card to pay the deposits. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, don't worry, you have plenty. Think of it as my gift, only with your resources." I stayed quiet, though my chest tightened. I set the flowers in Richard's old vase, telling myself they were beautiful despite the sour taste they left behind. Every detail of the party seemed to highlight her control, not my celebration. That night, alone in bed, I whispered to Richard's photograph, "I don't trust her, but I'll let this play out. Maybe she'll show her hand." And deep down, I knew she would. The evening of my birthday arrived with the smell of garlic bread wafting through the house and the sound of clinking glasses echoing across the living room. Candles flickered on the mantel, casting shadows over Richard's photograph, which Olivia had moved without asking, setting it off to the side so her flower arrangements could take center stage. Guests mingled politely, balancing plates of hors d'oeuvres on paper napkins, stamped with my initials, an unnecessary flourish she insisted on. I smiled where expected, accepted hugs, and nodded through well-meaning condolences about Richard. But beneath it all, I felt the ground shift, as though the party belonged to someone else. Olivia drifted through the crowd, her heels clicking like a metronome, her laugh louder than the rest. Daniel hovered near the kitchen doorway, his smile tight, his eyes darting between us. When the room grew quiet, Olivia picked up the microphone from the rented speaker system and tapped it twice for attention. "Let's all raise our glasses," she announced, her voice warm and commanding. "Tonight we celebrate Eleanor Hayes, 66 years young, a woman of strength." Applause rippled through the crowd, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe her words. Then she tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "But we also must admit," she continued, "that age comes with certain limitations. Eleanor's alone now, fragile, too stubborn to admit she needs others to manage things for her. If it were up to me—" She paused, savoring the silence. She'd spent her last years dying alone, unwanted, with no one left to cling to. The words struck harder than any blow. A fork clattered to the floor, the laughter dissolved into uneasy coughs, and the air thickened with discomfort. My cheeks burned, not from shame, but from a rising fury that steadied me more than it shook me. I placed my glass carefully on the table, straightened my shoulders, and locked eyes with her. My voice carried across the stunned room. "You have 10 minutes, I said evenly. 10 minutes to leave my house." The room stayed frozen after my words, as if time itself had paused. Olivia let out a brittle laugh, glancing at the guests as though to recruit them to her side. No one returned her smile. Daniel shifted uneasily, his jaw tight. I held her gaze until she looked away. Then I turned to the small walnut desk in the corner. My hand trembled only slightly as I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Michael," I said when my attorney answered. "It's time. Come to the house. Bring the envelope." Olivia's color drained. "What envelope?" she demanded, her voice shrill now. "You'll find out soon enough," I replied, my tone calm, almost cold. The guests whispered among themselves, sipping nervously at their drinks. The minutes stretched unbearably long until headlights cut across the curtains and a knock came at the door. Michael Grant entered, a tall man with silver hair, his briefcase clutched firmly. He nodded to me, then surveyed the uneasy crowd before pulling a thick sealed envelope from his case. "This," he announced, "was entrusted to me by the late Richard Hayes. He instructed me to deliver its contents only if Eleanor was ever publicly humiliated in her own home." His words sent a ripple through the room, a collective intake of breath. Olivia's eyes widened. This is absurd. She's making a spectacle out of nothing. Michael ignored her protests and broke the seal with deliberate care. He withdrew several documents, a letter, and a small USB drive. "Mr. Hayes was meticulous," he said. "He anticipated this night." Daniel stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "Dad left something like this." Michael's eyes softened. "He left protection." "Daniel, for your mother." Olivia swallowed hard, her hands gripping the back of a chair as if it were the only solid thing left in the room. The party had become a courtroom, and every guest was now a witness. And I, for the first time in months, felt Richard's presence beside me, steady, unyielding, and ready to be heard. Michael adjusted his glasses and began with the letter, his voice steady, carrying Richard's words into the room as if he had never left us. "To my beloved wife Eleanor," he read, "and to all who may hear this, if this letter is being opened, it means the respect owed to her has been broken. I cannot stand by, even in death, while the woman who shared my life is made a target in her own home." The guests leaned forward, hushed and motionless. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, her arms folded tight across her chest. Michael continued, holding up the next document. "Richard established a trust fund ensuring that Eleanor's property, assets, and accounts cannot be accessed, altered, or diminished by anyone, including family, without her consent. Every legal safeguard has been placed to protect her independence." I caught Olivia's eyes flicker with panic. She glanced toward Daniel, perhaps hoping he would intervene, but his expression was stricken. Michael set the papers aside and reached into the envelope once more. "There is more," he said quietly. He displayed a set of printed photographs, then clicked a small remote connected to a projector Olivia herself had rented. Images flashed against the wall, Olivia in a dimly lit restaurant, holding hands with a man who was not my son. Another photo showed her exchanging envelopes of cash, her handwriting visible on the receipts, messages about pushing me to sell the house. Gasps spread across the room. One guest muttered, "My God!" Daniel's face drained of color. Olivia shot to her feet. "This is twisted. Taken out of context. You're all being manipulated." Her voice cracked, louder than she intended, betraying her fear. Michael let her words hang before speaking. "These materials were gathered by Richard's private investigator. He anticipated attempts to exploit Eleanor's grief. His instructions were clear. Should evidence be needed, it must be made public." I folded my hands in my lap, my anger cooling into something sharper. Olivia wanted a spectacle, and now she stood inside one she could not control. Daniel's voice cracked as he finally spoke, louder than he meant to. "Olivia, is this true?" His hands trembled, the veins on his temples visible as he stared at her. The guests fell silent again, waiting for the answer that hung in the air like smoke. Olivia's chin quivered, her mascara beginning to blur. "Daniel, you don't understand. I was desperate. I grew up with nothing, always scraping by. I just wanted security. For us. For our future." She reached for his hand, but he pulled back, his eyes clouded with disbelief. "Security?" His tone sliced through her excuses. "Is that what you call cheating? Manipulating? Using my mother's grief as a bargaining chip?" She sobbed then, loud and messy, as if tears could wash away what had been revealed. "I thought if I proved I could manage things better than she could, you'd see I was helping. I was trying to give us more." I felt my jaw tighten, though my voice came out calm. "You mistook kindness for weakness, Olivia. You thought age and loss would leave me defenseless. But Richard knew me better than that, and so should you have." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for sympathy, but none of the guests moved. Even her closest friends avoided her gaze. Daniel stood stiffly, the distance between them widening with every second. "You played a role in this house," I continued, my words deliberate. "But you forgot it was not your stage. You used my son, you disrespected my marriage, and tonight you disrespected me. That will not be forgiven." Olivia's sobs turned to pleading. "Please, Eleanor. Please, Daniel, don't throw me away like this. I only wanted a place to belong." For the first time all night, I allowed a trace of pity to flicker. But pity is not the same as trust, and trust, once broken, does not return. Daniel's shoulders sagged as he whispered, almost to himself, "I don't even know who you are anymore." Michael cleared his throat and laid another document on the table. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes anticipated this as well. This is a formal agreement for Olivia to withdraw any claim to your estate or assets. I am authorized to witness her signature tonight. Tomorrow. The paperwork will be filed with the court." Olivia's mouth fell open. "You can't force me to sign this." "No one is forcing you," Michael said evenly. "But if you refuse, the evidence presented tonight will move directly into the court record. Every photo, every receipt, every note of betrayal. Do you really wish for that spectacle?" The silence in the room pressed like a weight. Guests stared at the floor or at their shoes, desperate not to be caught in the middle. Daniel stood apart, his face carved in stone, his silence more condemning than any words. Olivia's hands shook as she picked up the pen. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her breath ragged. She scribbled her name, the ink blotting where the pen pressed too hard. When it was done, she shoved the paper toward Michael, as if pushing away her own downfall. "Witnessed," Michael said, signing beneath hers and slipping the papers into his case. "Effective immediately." The guests began to shuffle toward the door, offering me faint smiles of sympathy, avoiding Olivia's glare. Plates of half-eaten food cluttered the tables. The candles burned low, and the scent of roses had turned sickly sweet. Olivia stood there, trembling, clutching her handbag. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. Finally, with a choked breath, she turned on her heel and walked out, the slam of the door echoing through the hollow room. Daniel didn't follow her. He lowered himself onto a chair, his face in his hands. I reached out, touching his shoulder gently. For the first time in years, he let himself lean against me, the way he had as a child after a nightmare. The nightmare was over for me. For him, it had only just begun. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Olivia packed her things and left Daniel's apartment without a goodbye. Papers were filed. Lawyers exchanged letters. And soon her name was nothing more than a line struck through on legal documents. She tried once to call me, but I let the phone ring until it stopped. Some doors must remain closed. Daniel moved back into a small townhouse not far from me. He visited often, sometimes lingering late into the evening with a cup of tea in his hands, his eyes full of regret. We didn't speak much about Olivia. Silence said enough. But I saw the change in him, how he watched me more carefully, how he asked if I needed groceries, how he paused before leaving as if reluctant to walk back into his own emptiness. For myself, I filled the days with small routines, morning walks through the neighborhood, waving to the mailman, nodding at the woman who always trimmed her hedges too short. I sorted Richard's books, donated some to the library, kept the ones with his penciled notes in the margins. In the evenings, I wrote in a journal, sometimes letters to him, sometimes thoughts to myself. It felt like breathing again, slow and steady. One afternoon, I joined a volunteer group at the community center. We delivered meals to elderly neighbors, some of whom reminded me painfully of the loneliness I had feared. I realized then that Richard's foresight hadn't just protected me legally, it had given me the strength to stand for others who had no one left. Grief still visited, as it always would, but it no longer owned me. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. It carried my footsteps, my choices, my voice. And though Olivia's cruelty had wounded me, it was that very wound that pushed me forward into a life not of survival, but of purpose. Nearly a year passed before the idea took full shape. On the anniversary of Richard's death, I stood in the very community center where I had begun volunteering and announced the creation of the Richard Hayes Foundation. Its mission was simple but urgent: to protect the dignity of older adults who faced manipulation, isolation, or exploitation from those closest to them. The room erupted in applause, but I felt the truest response in the quiet nods of widows and widowers sitting in the back, their eyes glistening with recognition. They knew the weight of silence, the sting of betrayal, the fear of being dismissed. I wanted them to know they weren't powerless, that love, real love, could defend them even beyond the grave. Daniel stood beside me that day, his arm lightly resting across my shoulders. Our relationship was not perfect. Scars remained. But there was respect between us again, born from honesty and hard lessons. I no longer saw the boy caught between loyalty and love. I saw a man who had chosen to stand by his mother. As for Olivia, she became a name we seldom spoke. Her absence was its own form of closure. The foundation carried more weight than any revenge could. It turned pain into protection, anger into action. I once believed I had lost everything when Richard died, but he left me more than memories. He left me the strength to fight for myself and the courage to fight for others. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.